In the last photo Daniel Foster ever took, he's grinning. The kind of easy California smile you don't think twice about. That evening, he lay on his couch, texting me he'd never felt more alive. Hours later, his body was found in that same living room. He trusted her completely. She knew every curve of his laugh, and she knew exactly how to extinguish it. This is the story of Daniel and Amanda, a love so passionate it turned deadly. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Daniel Foster was 30 years old, working in sales and living in Phoenix, Arizona. His life was steady, built around predictable routines: morning coffee, long commutes, client calls, gym sessions. Amanda Price was 28, a soft-spoken waitress at a quiet cafe on the east side, an aspiring photographer who carried her camera the way some people carry diaries. They met on a hot summer evening at a friend's backyard barbecue. The air smelled of charcoal and cut grass. Daniel, holding 2 beers, wasn't watching where he was going and collided with her. Amber liquid splashed across her light skirt. She laughed, not a polite laugh, but one that sounded genuinely amused, and handed him a napkin. That night, she sent him a text. "Still sorry about the beer." He responded almost instantly. "Still adorable." They talked until the sky lightened, sharing pieces of themselves usually reserved for people who had already proven they'd stay. And in the early weeks, their romance moved quickly, almost as if they were afraid it might burn out before it could take root. Daniel surprised her with flowers, sometimes roses, sometimes wild desert blooms wrapped in brown paper. Amanda photographed him against the Arizona sunset. His silhouette was sharp against the fading light. Her lens seemed to linger on him, steadying the curve of his jaw, the way he ran his hand through his hair when he was thinking. She laughed at his jokes, memorized the timbre of his voice. But sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, her gaze would fix on him with something deeper, something that carried both tenderness and possession. 6 months later, over drinks with a friend, Daniel admitted with a half-smile, "She suffocates me sometimes, but her hold feels like home." It was the first time he put it into words, the first sign that love, when too tight, can begin to feel like a rope. By the end of their first year together, Daniel and Amanda had settled into a rhythm, but it was a rhythm Daniel sometimes found exhausting. At first, her attention felt flattering. Morning texts before his alarm went off, surprise lunches dropped off at his office, long phone calls even after they'd spent the entire day together. But slowly, those gestures began to feel less like affection and more like surveillance. If he didn't answer her call immediately, another would follow, then another. Amanda would ask, "Where were you? Who were you with?" Her voice was always soft, never shouting, but the persistence made it impossible to dismiss. Daniel began to notice her eyes scanning his phone when it buzzed, her questions circling back to the same themes. Fronts started pulling away from them as a couple. At gatherings, Amanda seemed quieter, but her hand was always on Daniel's arm, her fingers tapping lightly as if to remind him she was there. Once, after he left his phone on the counter while stepping outside to take a call, he came back to find Amanda scrolling through it, her expression unreadable. When he asked what she was doing, she simply said, "Just curious." Daniel laughed it off in front of friends, but that night, alone in bed, he lay awake thinking about how curiosity can sometimes be the start of control. He remembered telling himself it was love because it was easier than admitting it might be something else. By their second year, the once playful banter between Daniel and Amanda had thinned into sharp edges. Arguments didn't start with raised voices. They began with silence. A silence that stretched across dinner tables, that followed them on drives, that could turn an entire evening into a quiet war. Daniel noticed how quickly Amanda's mood could shift. One night, she'd curl against him on the couch, tracing his jawline with her fingertips. The next, she'd accuse him of being distant, of pulling away. He tried to reassure her, telling her he loved her, that nothing was wrong. But reassurance, he learned, only bought him time. Hours, maybe days, before the cycle began again. The tension began bleeding into intimate moments. What once felt passionate started to feel like a test, a performance, where failure meant punishment in the form of coldness or suspicion. Amanda's questions became more pointed. Did you think about someone else? Are you sure you're happy with me? She'd say them half smiling as if they were jokes, but Daniel could feel the weight underneath. He found himself telling small lies to avoid conflict, claiming to work late when he was really having a beer with a coworker, silencing his phone so Amanda wouldn't hear background noise. But lies, even small ones, have a way of leaving traces, and Amanda was good at finding traces. One evening, after he came home later than expected, she was sitting on the couch in the dark. No TV, no music, just her, waiting. "You said you'd be back by 7, she said. Her tone was calm, but her hands were twisting in her lap. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, the kind you feel when you realize you're no longer walking through a relationship, you're navigating a minefield. And somewhere deep down, he wondered which mine would go off first. It happened on a night that began like any other, at least that's what Daniel would later think about, replaying the hours before it all unraveled. He'd worked a long day, his head pounding from back-to-back meetings, and all he wanted was a quiet dinner and an early night. But the moment he stepped through the door, Amanda's eyes were locked on him, searching. "You didn't answer my last 2 texts," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it, like a door rattling on its hinges. Daniel explained that his phone had been in his desk drawer, that he'd been swamped. But the explanation only seemed to feed her anger. "You always have an excuse," she said, standing in the middle of the kitchen, blocking his path. The fight built in layers, first words, then accusations, then memories from months ago being dragged back into the light. Daniel felt himself getting louder, something he usually avoided. Amanda, in turn, grew quieter. Her sentences clipped, her jaw tight. It was the kind of argument that leaves no room for retreat. Every sentence seemed to demand a bigger, more desperate reply. In the middle of it, Amanda said something Daniel never forgot. "If I can't have all of you, then no one will," she said, almost under her breath as if testing the words. Daniel froze. There are things you hear in relationships that you can brush off. Jealous jokes, harmless dramatics, but this wasn't one of them. This felt like a marker, a point of no return. That night, he slept in the spare room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman he had once thought he'd marry. He thought about how the laughter had faded, replaced by a suspicion. He thought about leaving, but he also thought about how Amanda would react. And as much as he tried to push the thought away, one question kept coming back. Was she capable of crossing a line she couldn't uncross? It was a humid Friday in late July. The kind of Phoenix night where the air feels heavy and restless. Daniel had spent the afternoon at his friend Luke's apartment, helping him move furniture, drinking a couple of beers. He texted Amanda earlier, just a short message, "Home late, don't wait up." She didn't reply. When he walked in just after midnight, the apartment was dim, except for a small lamp in the living room. Amanda was on the couch, knees pulled up, eyes fixed on the doorway, as if she'd been waiting for hours. The silence was so complete that Daniel could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. "Where were you?" Her voice was calm, but her grip on the throw blanket in her lap was tight enough to wrinkle the fabric. Daniel explained again. Luke's place, helping out, nothing more. But Amanda's expression didn't change. "You smell like beer," she said, standing up slowly. They moved into the kitchen, the argument picking up where it had left off weeks before. Only now there was no pretense, no attempt at softness. Amanda accused him of cheating, of lying, of making her feel like she was an afterthought. Daniel pushed back, telling her he couldn't live under constant interrogation. At one point, Daniel turned to leave, muttering that they'd talk in the morning. That's when Amanda stepped in front of him, her voice cracking, not from sadness, but from something sharper. "You don't get to walk away from me. Not tonight." What happened next would later be pieced together from evidence, not witnesses. The kitchen counter held an open bottle of wine, 2 half-full glasses, and a kitchen knife that had been left out from dinner earlier. Detectives would say there was no sign of premeditation in the way it was placed, but the sequence after that was fast, violent, and final. Neighbors reported hearing a crash, a glass shattering, followed by raised voices, and then silence. When the noise didn't return, no one called the police. Not yet. It wasn't until 6:45 the next morning that a neighbor noticed Amanda sitting on the front steps, barefoot, her shirt stained dark. When asked if she was all right, she simply said, "I think he's dead." By the time paramedics arrived, Daniel was lying on the kitchen floor, a single deep wound to his chest. His phone was on the counter, screen lit up with an unanswered message from Luke. "You home yet?" The coroner would later place his time of death around 12:45 a.m., less than an hour after he walked through the front door. Amanda sat in the living room, hands folded in her lap. Her voice was steady when officers asked what happened. "He grabbed me. I was scared. I grabbed the knife." She didn't cry. She didn't ask if he was okay. She just stared at the floor as they cuffed her hands behind her back. The police station's fluorescent lights made her look pale, almost translucent. In the interview room, she repeated the same story. Self-defense, fear, an argument gone too far. But as detectives pressed, inconsistencies emerged. She said Daniel lunged at her, yet the medical examiner noted the wound angle suggested he was turning away. She said she dropped the knife immediately, but her fingerprints covered the handle and blade in a way that suggested prolonged grip. They found no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds on Amanda, and no alcohol in Daniel's system beyond what a single beer would leave. The open bottle of wine, only 1 glass had been drunk from. By mid-afternoon, news of the arrest began to spread. Neighbors who'd once seen the couple holding hands on the balcony now whispered about the girl who couldn't let go. Friends of Daniel's flooded social media with photos, his easy smile, his weekend hikes, his love for road trips into the desert. Amanda's name, though changed in our story, began trending locally. As detectives reviewed phone records, a fuller picture formed. Hundreds of messages from Amanda in the weeks before, many sent within a minute of each other. Unanswered calls at 3, 4, 5 in the morning, the tone shifting from affection to accusation in a single thread. In the quiet of the evidence room, the lead detective reportedly shook his head and said, "This wasn't about self-defense, this was about control." Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The trial began 8 months later in Maricopa County Superior Court. By then, the story had taken on a life of its own. Local talk shows debated whether Amanda Price was a victim or a calculated killer. The courtroom was packed on opening day. Daniel's parents seated in the front row, his mother clutching a silver cross so tightly her knuckles were white. The prosecution painted a picture of obsession turned lethal. They presented text logs showing Amanda sending 47 messages in one night after Daniel didn't answer her call. They played a voicemail from just 2 days before his death, her voice low, trembling. "You don't just walk away from me." A neighbor testified to hearing raised voices hours before Daniel's death. The medical examiner's testimony was damning. The angle and depth of the wound are consistent with a deliberate thrust, not a defensive action. Amanda's defense attorney countered with claims of emotional abuse. He brought up moments where Daniel allegedly belittled her in public and her history of anxiety, suggesting the fatal night was a panic response. Amanda herself took the stand, wearing a plain navy dress, speaking softly about feeling cornered and terrified in those final moments. She wept when shown a photograph of Daniel alive, taken just a week before the incident. Jurors watched intently, some jotting notes, others glancing at the victim's family. The tension in the room was unrelenting. Every pause, every objection, every whispered exchange between attorneys felt loaded. The trial lasted 11 days, each one stretching longer than the last. When closing arguments came, the prosecution's voice sharpened. This wasn't fear, this was possession. And when he tried to leave, she made sure he never could. The defense urged the jury to see a young woman pushed past her breaking point. The case was now in the hands of 12 strangers, tasked with deciding whether Amanda Price would spend decades in behind bars or walk out into the Arizona sun a free woman. On the final day, the courtroom felt heavier than the desert heat outside. Reporters lined the back wall, the cameras trained on Amanda Price. Daniel's family sat silently, faces set, as the bailiff announced the jury had reached a decision. When the four-person stood, you could hear nothing but the faint hum of the air conditioner. We, the jury, find the defendant, Amanda Price, guilty of second-degree murder. A sharp gasp came from Daniel's sister, followed by muffled sobs. Amanda stared straight ahead, her lips trembling, but her eyes dry, as though the weight of the word guilty hadn't yet settled into her bones. Outside the courthouse, opinions split sharply. Some saw justice served, a dangerous obsession punished. Others saw a flawed woman destroyed by her own emotions, deserving compassion. Social media lit up with debates about love, control, and the fine line between passion and possession. Amanda was sentenced to 22 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. Before being led away, she turned once, her gaze scanning the room as if searching for a familiar face. She found none. Daniel's mother, when asked by a reporter if she forgave Amanda, paused for a long moment. She said, "I forgive her, but forgiveness doesn't bring my son home." And now I ask you, if you were in Amanda's place, would you have reacted differently? Or if you were Daniel, would you have seen the danger sooner? Love can bind us, but it can also blind us. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.